Hey, recently I had I had a first. I erased a video that I had put out. Haven't really done that before, but I had made a video. I released it, and the first comments, like half of them, were like, "You sound really arrogant," and "I don't like this attitude," and "You are disparaging to your opponent." So I erased it. I didn't want to come off as arrogant. Well, arrogant I can live with. Arrogant I can live with, but I didn't want to disparage my opponent. I really did not want to disparage my opponent. So I I had to redo that because it was not my point. And apparently my attitude was completely making people miss the point. So this is my attempt at a redo. Let's go. Just a sec. Now, the point I was making is, am I allowed to dislike multi-rocket launcher spam? So, I'm going to do this in a couple of arguments, and this is, of course, all based on a game I had at the WTC. You can go and watch that video where people already were like commenting and calling my bluff, which is perfectly fine. You can always do that. I do talk a lot of crap. But so in that video, people were like, uh, "No, you're playing Gurkhas. You can't complain about multi launches because Gurkhas are OP." Or uh, the comment for the other one, "You're being arrogant and disparaging to your opponent." I really did not want to do that. I really didn't want to be disparaging to my opponent because I love my opponents, and even the opponent that I had in the game that made me think about this, I really liked him. He was a great guy. There was no problem with him at all. I didn't enjoy the game. That's something different. Um, so it's really not about that one game. I was using that as and I'm still using that game as an example. There will be others. So that is some of the disclaimers. That of course this is a not a response to the comments, because most of the comments you're of course right. My attitude was, I don't know, but I can live with being arrogant. I just don't want to be disparaging. I really don't want to shit on people. That is not what this channel is about. So I'm trying not to do that, um, and I'm trying to say that it's really not about that one game. It's about more games than that, and it's about a specific type of build. And I have termed that build the Noob Basher build. Um, it wasn't me that came up with the name, by the way. It was a name that was running around in the competitive Danish circuit um, before I used it here. But if you go and watch my videos on army builds, this is one of the builds. It is called the Noob Basher because typically you'll see beginning players, rookie players, simply freak out when they face it, and it's really difficult to play against when you're new. Um, when you're a veteran, apparently, it's also difficult to play against. And one of the commenters were like, "You call it the noob basher. Should we call you a noob?" Well, that's not the point. Saying that something is a noob basher is not calling my opponent a noob. That's not what I'm trying to do. I am calling that build, the army build, the noob basher, because it will typically win games against beginning players, but it will struggle to consistently win games against veteran players. That's the point. That's why it's called the noob basher. Right. On to the video then. So this is why I dislike the noob basher builds. Basically, for me, it feels like the players who are running that are gambling. They're not playing a tactical game, they're just gambling. They're rolling dice to see if they can roll sixes. Um, because there's very little to no tactical nuance in the list in how it plays. You place your multi launchers, hopefully in some sort of cover, and then you start trying to roll sixes. Typically, the multi-launchers won't move much either. Um, and it's just a question for you about getting as many houses and as much open ground in the opponent's sectors as possible. Because from there on, you're just rolling for that 6. That, for me, lacks tactical nuance, and it does not give you, as a player, any chance to shine. You're not using skill, you're using random numbers generation, as somebody called it. You're basically just rolling dice, and if you're really good at rolling 6s, or if you're really lucky, then you'll win. But being really good at rolling 6s means you're cheating, and being really lucky is, well, okay. I don't. I personally don't think that luck should decide games. Um, Although it should play a part, but it shouldn't decide games. And even worse, there's very little to no influence as an opponent when you're playing against a multi-rocket launcher list. Typically, you'll end up feeling like you didn't really have any influence on the result of the game, which again sucks. It wasn't that you made massively bad decisions. You have two decisions, right? Do I want to give him shots where I'm a little bit closer with some of the units? Or do I want to spread out all my units so that he can only shoot at one unit at a time? That's one decision. The second decision you have is, do I go down? Both of these decisions are not very complex and not very interesting. And for the do I go down decision, typically it will feel like you're wasting valuable time instead of actually moving. The thing that I like about bold action is the movement part, it's the tactical parts. When do I move up? When do I advance on that position to take it? Do I wait until my preparatory bombardment has given them a few pins? Do I shoot them first? What do I do? All of that is tactical decisions. Do I go down? Do I think my opponent is going to roll a 6? Do I go down? That's not a tactical decision. That's me reacting to his luck before I know what his luck is. Blah. That's nothing. So I really don't like the new Basher builds. The new Basher builds, by the way, I maybe should have said this, is when you have 3 or more multi-launchers in your list. And yes, you can have more. I have seen this done with 7 multi-launchers in one list. So, which is insane, and it's not fun to play against because of, well, the opponent is just gambling. Or the opponent is saying, well, on average, and then gambling on that. Right. So what is the math of this? Well, with 3 multi-rocket launchers and 6 turns, you should on average kill 3 units if the opponent spreads out. If during some of the turns you maybe not have one of your multi-launchers online, so it might be in reserve, or it might not have a shot, or the opponent might clump up a little bit, that would change this math a little bit, right? So in the specific example of me against Ralaka at the WTC, he had one of his multi-launchers in reserve, so it was offline for some of the turns, and he had 2 multi-launchers on the table, and I was spreading out. I gave him 1 shot in my deployment where he could fire at 2 units, and that was only because I thought, well, maybe I'll get at least one of them to move away from the other unit before he hits me. That didn't happen. He hit me on the first try with a mortar. What can you do? Rolling 6s, right? But so I did try and spread out, which was the first decision I had to make. And beyond that one deployment thing, there were 2 points where I had to clump up a few units because they had to come onto the board. So I had very few places where I could, or I had some places, and all of them were good unless my opponent had multi-launchers. Then they were, I am betting on him not rolling a 6, right? So I had two times where I had to clump up a little bit, where I had two units that were pretty close, and each time he hit me. And I mean, that should happen a third of the time. Mathematically, that should happen a third of the time. He hit me every single time. Which again just goes to show that when you're running multi-launchers, you're gambling. You're trying to do something which just relies on dice, not as much on what the opponent does. Now, this is where the Noob Basher builds actually can break the normal math of what I do on this channel. On this channel, I'm all about seeing players' skill, and sometimes the lists as well. I will typically say that I think players figuring out who will win based on player skill is 80% accurate for me. That's around it. If I know who the players are, I can predict more or less 80% who is going to win a tournament. If I just see the list, I'm around 60-40, somewhere around the 50-60% mark accurate in who's going to win. So it's better to know the players, which means that I argued again and again that I think the player's skill is more important than the list, but the list does play a part. Now, if we look at me against Relaka came 59th at the WTC. He was a replacement player on a replacement team. So it was a ringer team that was just called in because they had we had one team drop out, so we were on equal numbers. He was not a player who had won tournaments before. He was not a player who finished regularly in the top 5 of tournaments. So I am not trying to disparage him when I'm saying that he is at best an average tournament player. What I would term in my 1 to 5 a 3. Right? He wasn't a bad player at all. He's not a complete rookie that didn't know the rules at all. He really knew the rules. There was no problem there. He was not a historical player that sacrifices stuff. His list was perfectly competitive. He was what you might term an average player, a player who goes to tournaments, sometimes does well, sometimes does badly, has a pretty okay list. His list for me was again a 3, maybe a 3.5, because Noob Basher lists are always difficult. He came 59th. Now, I repeatedly come the top 5. I've been in the top 5 of all the WTCs I've attended. I have won national tournaments. I have taken medal at multiple national tournaments abroad as well. I have played against the top players of Europe and always had equal games. I have lost far less than I've actually won. So I think, and I am rated by other people as well, by the way, not by myself, to be a 5 player. Now, for me, that should more or less automatically mean that I should win that game. It means that if my tactics are good, if I don't make many mistakes, I should win that game. Now, that was not really happening. The game was a draw, and I think that it became a draw basically down to my planning and my tactical use of my units, because I was mobile, and I'll show you why in a minute. So Relaka here, he was actually killing more of my army than I was killing of his, and that almost had him winning the game. It didn't, but it almost had. So for me, Relaka was breaking the math, right? The math says that I should win that game. Relaka was breaking the math, both because he was killing way more than 3 of my units, and it wasn't just 4, it was 7 of my units that got killed with multi-launchers. 7. So he was breaking the math, and that's what can happen sometimes when you have multi-launcher lists. You can really do that, and then the opponent's skill does not matter. That is why I dislike it. So I'm not trying to disparage Relaka. I'm trying to be realistic in the assessment here. The skill difference between me and Relaka didn't matter, because he was still murdering me with the sixes, that he was rolling more than he normally on average should. So he was gambling and he was winning due to that. Now, the opposite can also be true, by the way. And here comes a different example. So Paul Wickens, who is a really good UK player, I would also rate him a 4.5 or a 5 player. He's one of the top players. He's run at multiple events. He often comes top 5 or 3. He's won events. A few years back, he took a new basher list to the Danish Nationals, and I think it had 4 or 5 Katushes. And there were 38 players, and he came 19th. Why? Because there was a lot of players who ended up above him that, in my estimation, are not as good as him. I mean, Paul Wickens has attended multiple WTCs. He knows his stuff. Many of the players who were above him were not tournament players in Denmark. They were just players who wanted to attend because it was the Danish Nationals. And they did well. And some of them are good, but some of them are just average. Why did that happen? Well, Paul had 2 wins, 1 draw, and 2 losses. And that's because that list he was playing with was a betting list, and it didn't win him the bets. So his multi-launchers were not winning him the games because he didn't roll the sixes that he needed. The opponents were spread out, and that was the only decision to make. After that, he was trying to roll sixes, didn't get them before his opponents had killed the different Katushes that he had in his list. So a good player can't make this list any better. It's still just random. And you'll end up in the mid or in the bottom or the top, depending on what you roll. It's just random. Yeah. So for me, in conclusion, I think one multi-rocket launcher is a good tactical challenge. It does add something, a single multi-rocket launcher. So it's not that I'm against multi-rocket launchers per se. It means that houses become a little more difficult. It means that you can try and encourage the opponent to spread out, which is difficult otherwise, unless you have a artillery observer. 2 can be really challenging and hard to play against, because then you're both giving them the tactical challenge, but you're also at the same time trying to roll sixes, right? So I played against, for instance, Danny of the Dutch WTC team, and he often plays 2 land mattress 114mm American version of that, and that can be really difficult. Go and watch my review of a game against him at the Dutch Nationals. It can be really difficult because at some point you're going to have to clamp up a little bit, and with 2 multi-launchers he can punish you for that. But 3 is unfun. It's just random gambling, and for me, no, I don't like that. I don't think it has tactical skill. I don't think it adds something fun to the game. I don't think it adds something tactical to the game, and it takes away one of the few things that I really like about this game, is that skill does matter. It changes that until a point where skill doesn't matter as much if you're just gambling, right? So, is it valid? Yes, of course. If that's what you can take, that's what you can take. I have no problem with it at all. Is it fun? I don't think so. I don't think so. So, now, some of the comments, I've got to address some of the comments, because why don't I mind other OP units? So, like, some of the comments were comparing that I ran Gurkhas and he was running multi-launchers. Aren't they the same? For me, no. No, I don't think so. Other OP units like bodied armored engineers with flamethrowers, the new Italian Cavalleria that can double charge, or the Polish Lancers that has 2 attacks, stewards, Gurkhas, para Gurkhas, all of that demands a level of tactical decision and tactical expertise. If you just set down your Gurkhas in the open and start up and adding towards the enemy, they'll be dead before you reach the enemy. Um, so setting up the assault is important. If you just go forward every turn with your steward shooting at something, that will go down. You won't kill a thing. Something will kill it with a Panzerfaust. Um, so I don't mind the other OP units. Do I think some of them need a slight points adjustment? Yes. But I think they actually do something tactically valid and good for the game, because they mean, you can sort of shift the odds in one aspect of the game, but that means that you're going to try and have to do that aspect of the game. So the steward really wants to try and shoot, right? It doesn't want to be up close to an opponent. The Gurkhas really want to assault. They don't want to get stuck in prolonged firefights with people who have LMGs or BARs or whatever. So you're going to have to try and make the game about that one aspect that your troops are good at. I like that. That is a good tactical play, because it encourages you to play in a way that encouraged or makes that happen. And they don't really take away the aspect of player skill, player plan, as the main thing that wins games. So, and I'll get to why I think that is true in a minute, because a lot of people say, well, you're taking auto-win Gurkhas. Like, go and watch my videos with Michael C, right? Every time he can, he's shitting on me before playing auto-win Gurkhas, and he's perfectly allowed to do that. You can, I mean, you're all allowed to your opinions. You can hate Gurkhas how much you want. I don't care. For me, they add a tactical element because they add the fact that you can shift the odds of you winning close combats in your favor, which means that you need to get to close combat. How do I do that? That is a tactical play. And for that, the best player, the player who is best able to get your units into close combat or into shooting range or whatever, or has the best plan for doing that, he will typically win. So that's what I want. That's why I don't mind the other OP units, because they're not gambling. They're tactical. So one other thing that happened was, I said that I had the best plan. And that can sound arrogant, I know. Now, let me do an experiment with you. Imagine that you're playing sectors. So you have the sector here. 6 units are deployed. They are deployed behind line of sight, blocking cover. And there's easy roads to access the enemy neutral or deployment zone. You have 1 forward deployer. The enemy has 1 forward deployer. The enemy deploys 3 units that can enter the neutral zones. Can't really enter your zone, but can enter the neutral zones. And he deploys 4 units that can't really move, that are more or less immobile. He has 7 units in reserve. Yes, you have 8 units in reserve. Can you tell who is going to win? Because I can. It's just simple math. If he has 3-4 units here that can't really move out of that zone, he is 4 units down of his, how many? 16 units, whatever. He's 4 units down. They can't be scoring. So if you just move all your units towards his zone, push some of them into his zone, he can get 7 units into your zone. If you can get 8 units plus 1 forward deployer into his, he's lost. He's definitely lost. And you can even run your 6 units into the neutral zones and be okay. That's why I say you can tell, just based on deployment and game plan, who's going to win a game. Now, this gets messed up once you have random numbers generation, you have mistakes, especially if one player is gambling and winning those gambles. And that was why I said I knew I could win this game, because this is the deployment that Relaka had against me. And this is my game plan against Relocka. I move into his zone. Okay, he might kill a few units. It won't be enough to make up for the 4 units that he's left in his own deployment zone. It won't be enough. And then it almost was, because random numbers. So, can I evaluate a plan and tell you who's going to win? Yes, I think I can. Unless the dice are really not where they should be. So, right. There was one thing I needed to say. It was, oh yeah, the best player winning games. I really should have made a slide for that. If I look down, and this is why I don't think that Gurkhas are auto-win. If I look down through how the different players who played Brits at the WTC, what they came, we had 6 players in the top third. You had 6 players playing Brits in the top third. You had 5 players in the middle third, and you had 5 players in the bottom third. That was more or less the distribution. I can go and get the numbers at some point. But this means for me that there is skill. There's skill involved. Like the best players who know how to play Gurkhas end up in the top third, right? The mediocre ones end up in the top, the middle, and the bad ones end up in the bottom. You have a distribution. So for me, that says that playing Gurkhas is not an auto-win. You don't automatically end up doing well, winning all your games because you're playing Gurkhas. So, yeah. That was it from me today. I do hope that I wasn't being too, I don't know, um, disparaging, arrogant, all of that. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will get back to you. And let's stop the multi-launcher spam. It's stupid. See you. Cheers.